Welcome to the News 4 San Antonio Spurs Roundtable, powered by Project Spurs. I am your host, Jeff Garcia, and the Spurs have made some roster moves in the offseason, but the question is, have they been the good moves, or maybe they've been the wrong moves? We're going to talk about that and a lot more, and I'm joined by Quixem Ramirez, also of ProjectSpurs.com. Q, I thought this was the offseason, you know, we were supposed to take a break and breathe a little bit, but my goodness, the Spurs have been heavily involved in free agency, whether it be re-signings, signings, or rumors. So let's kick it off for pretty much the biggest news is that they brought back a couple players, Tiago Splitter and Manu Ginobili. Splitter reportedly a 4-year deal at $36 million, Manu Ginobili 2-year at $7 million. Right off the bat, good or bad to bring those two guys back?
I think it was necessary to bring those guys back. Some people think that they may have overpaid for those two players, and that's a fair point because these guys are both, well, Manu is deteriorating physically and he's not able to withstand his usual minutes. And Splitter is he's kind of a weird player because he's not dynamic on both ends of the floor. He's merely good on both ends. So people like to say that he's not tough and that they think he's overpaid. Well, when in reality, I believe that they are fairly paid and fairly compensated for their value.
You know, you brought up a good point that Manu Ginobili physically is not the same Manu Ginobili we've seen in years past. It showed greatly during the postseason and at least throughout the regular season. They overpaid him. I'm going to say right out right now, they overpaid him. I think it was too much. I would have been fine if it had been a 2-year deal with the second-year team option. You know, because with that now, you really constricted your roster, at least cap-wise, to getting a big-name player. AK-47 maybe? But, you know, 2-year deal for a guy that is clearly on the last legs of his career and physically may not be producing as much anymore, that is just overpaid.
Well, while he is deteriorating physically, like you said, and he's not even, he played his career low minutes last year. I think it was 23 per game. He still is a really productive shot creator. He assisted on 30% of the Spurs buckets, and he still was efficient on the floor at shooting-wise. He only took really good shots, and he was still productive in the minutes he did play.
And other players can't do that? I mean, you can't tell me that Tony Parker can't facilitate, Corey Joseph?
He can, but we can't expect Parker to play the whole game. So that's why Manu will step in as kind of a quasi-backup point guard kind of thing, and he'll fill in the gaps, he'll dish out the plays, and he won't be expected to do 30 minutes.
All right, you're saying you're quasi-backup point guard, but you got a point guard with Corey Joseph, at least, and we'll talk about this later with Summer League play. He's looking pretty good. But he is clearly developing. Not only total, he's younger. You know, we know that he can pass. Sometimes, maybe too much sometimes. But
go through the same issues.
You say the same thing, yeah. But 2 years, $7 million for a guy that maybe, and maybe should have hung it up already.
I disagree with most Spurs fans. I understand why people would say that. But
8 turnovers in a finals game?
Yeah, 12 turnovers in the last 2 games, and that was obviously really costly, and that prevented them possibly from winning their 5th title. But Manu Ginobili is still Manu Ginobili, and we may have overpaid, probably did, to keep a hometown star, but it's hard to see him off the Spurs, especially when he's still somewhat productive.
And at the end of the day, there was no doubt about it. The Spurs were going to bring him back. He's going to retire a Spur. His number's going to be hanging in the AT&T Center. There was no doubt about that. I think right now the fans are just griping on the fact that it was just too much. Because,
and that's fair.
That's fair, and especially the production late. I mean, I think Manu Ginobili knows it himself. That he knew that his...
And he's a smart player. He'll be able to compensate for his mistakes.
But if anything, aside from the loyalty factor, I also think they did not want to see Manu Ginobili playing for a different team in the Western Conference.
Houston was looking at him for a while.
Houston was
looking
at him. Yeah, they were interested.
That happening.
And he had gone off to another team. My goodness, that would have haunted the Spurs should they had played them in the playoffs. But, you know, with Splitter, too, I think, again, they overpaid him a bit more. I would like to see a little bit of reduction. Yes, he did improve tremendously, you know, overall, running that pick and roll. But there's still areas to improve. He's got to work on a little outside shot. You know, too much of his points come in the paint. You know, but that adds the other thing, too. You know, we're talking about the guard situations right now. One of the newest Spurs is Marco Bellinelli. They did re-sign him. They did sign him, 2 years at $6 million, reportedly. I like this move. I like it. I think it's Manu Ginobili all over again, but younger.
I like it, too. He's a good secondary ball handler. He can facilitate out of the pick and roll. He can dive. He can make the three-pointer. He can do everything we want him to do, and he even took a discount. There was a couple teams that offered him more money over more years, and he cut his salary by $2 million to play with the Spurs because he wanted to join a winner.
He went in an interview with NBA Italy, their website. I mean, he was just glowing about how much he's always wanted to play with the Spurs. He could not say enough about the organization, Popovich, and also, too, a former guy he looked up to, Manu Ginobili. They both played with each other and against each other.
And they know each other.
And they know each other. So I think there's a lot of that too. But solid move is going to just shore up the bench heading into next season.
Exactly.
But kind of a under the radar maybe move heading into next season is big man Jeff Pendergraph out of the Pacers last year. Now they signed him. Reportedly at 2 years, a little under $2 million. I like this guy. Not because of maybe he won't put up the numbers, because he's a little feisty, isn't he?
He's 6'9", he's 260, so he's a big guy. He's a bruiser, he's physical, he can guard power forwards, he can guard centers, he can do all the little dirty work that I guess DeJuan Blair used to do for the Spurs when he's not going to return. And he can even step back, make a 15-foot shot, so he's going to be a guy that you could watch and, you know, maybe do some pick and pops with Corey Joseph, the back line, make some shots, and he'll be a good signing for $2 million per year, which is not much in the NBA.
Yeah, it's not much in the NBA, and he came highly recommended from the newest assistant coach, and that's Boylan. He was just raving about him, saying, like, you Spurs got to get this guy. Again, I like Pendergraph. Again, he may not do it stat-wise. He'll do a lot of the dirty work, but we haven't had this type of fiery guy maybe since Steven Jackson when he left, and definitely since Mario Ellie.
Yes.
Back when, I don't know if you remember Mario Ellie.
Yeah, I do, actually.
You know, back in 1999.
Yeah,
okay,
tail end of
just
his
making
career,
sure.
yeah.
Just making sure, Q. But I guess at the end of the day, I guess the question is now, as the roster stands right now, because we don't know if the Spurs are going to do any other moves, but are these been the good moves or have they been bad moves?
Well, the Spurs don't have much money tied up, so these are probably the moves that they will stick with. Maybe add someone from the Summer League roster. But as of now,
because they have one roster spot
one
left.
roster, and that could go to Gary Neal or someone like that of that nature. As of right now, I still think the Spurs are the prohibitive favorites in the West, although the West is closing the gap.
I don't know about
closing
that.
The gap pretty.
I don't know. Russell Westbrook coming back next year.
Yeah, and that's also, and there's Dwight Howard moving to the West. You have a lot of components that could make it tough for the Spurs, but I still think they should be regarded as the early favorites.
Yeah, I don't like these moves. Aside from maybe from the Bellinelli move, but overall as a whole, I think they could have improved a little bit more. This team, as it stands right now, is still guard heavy. It really is.
Yeah. And we could have as much as 8 guys on the roster as a guard,
and
combo guard.
And then with the news about the Spurs, are they or will they not bring back Neal? That's just going to complicate things further.
Yeah, and well, there's also, it could open up some sign and trade possibilities if we do decide to let him go. We could also retain him in restricted free agency. But say we do sign him, we would have 8 guys, including Corey Joseph, DeColo, Patty Mills, Bellinelli. We have a logjam there, and potentially the Spurs could look for some trade pieces in that core group.
It's almost like a broken record every time we're heading into the offseason, into the new season.
Guard there, guard there, guard there.
Yeah, that and this team still needs size.
Yeah.
I mean, they reportedly had a shot at AK-47, Andre Karolinko. I think if they had signed him, then this would have been a very
And he was the perfect addition because he could guard 3 positions. He was big, he can shoot, he was Russian, so he has that kind of flair. And that would have been a nice addition to the Spurs bench for sure.
Well, those were our thoughts on the Spurs offseason moves. So far, we don't know if they're done wheeling and dealing, but make sure to go out to ProjectSpurs.com and, of course, News for San Antonio and leave your thoughts on the Spurs offseason moves so far in this supposedly quiet offseason.
Yes.
But, before we put a wrap on this show, the Summer League out in Vegas has kicked off. The Spurs are out there. They did win their first game, 69-68 over the Bobcats. Now, it is Summer League competition.
Yeah, so we can't overreact.
You can't overreact a little bit, but, it's just good to see some of the new guys showcase
Spurs basketball.
It's Spurs basketball, too. But, I want to touch on this. In the first game, Corey Joseph showed a lot of poise. He looked, I was watching the
confident, aggressive.
Where was this guy last season? What were your thoughts?
He was aggressive. He was assertive. He was just showing the floor. He was telling people where to screen. He was getting angry. He was getting emotional. He was being the leader on the Spurs.
Yeah.
And that was good to see because he's going to have to step in the Spurs. He's not going to play much minutes to start, but it's nice to see him develop into a point guard that could hopefully lead the team in the future.
And what about the newest Spur also, Deshaun Thomas? At least in one game, I guess the reports are right. He can score, can't he?
Yeah, he can. He can score in bunches. He can score from the pick and pop. He can do a lot, and I like the addition. Potentially he can make the roster or, maybe go to the Toros, see how he develops there.
Yeah. You think, is it really Deshaun that has a lot to prove, or is it really Corey out there?
I would think Corey Joseph is because he's on the roster still, and he's really young. He's shown that he's willing to develop in Austin, and I think if he makes some big strides here, he could be a a factor in the future
Well,
seasons.
I think Deshaun has a lot to prove because he needs a contract.
Yeah, he does.
He wants to play in the NBA.
He doesn't have that guaranteed
He doesn't
money
have
that's
that
going his way.
guaranteed money. Yeah. Well, those are our thoughts as well on the summer league. You know, you can also tune in. You can watch them on NBA TV. Yeah. So
Yes.
you want to get your fix of Spurs basketball? Go
They
check
will
it
be
out.
there.
They will be there. But yeah, make sure once again to go out to ProjectSpurs.com and of course News for San Antonio for everything you need on the Spurs during the offseason. But for Q, I am Jeff Garcia. Thanks again for watching this episode of the News for San Antonio Spurs Roundtable.